Legacy of a Traitor. Chapter 11. As the months began to rise and fade, the kingdom of Error expanded further into the world beyond. Civilizations rose to meet us, only to fall at the might of the King Shields. As my tribe executed King Genra's commands, legends were born of monsters in human form, and every word sullied our name further. Verse 11 of the Confessional Monolith.
That was one of the most exhilarating things anyone had ever experienced. At least, that's what eating had felt like to Weapon, though from what it had seemed, everyone else except Weapon ate all the time. Honestly, how could they not? This mission had better be a quick one, so that Weapon could once again eat delicious eggs and delicious bread and delicious fruit and delicious bread. I really must not dwell on food, or it will distract me, Clarence whispered as they leapt from the top of the dead wall and landed in the shadows next to a road of smooth stone. And Weapon reluctantly agreed with him. To think about such tastiness would probably make Weapon go mad. It had only been a few seconds since the new Master Surnir had given the order, one which was certainly more complicated than the last Master Surnir's order, and Weapon already had so many wonderful thoughts about the world of this mission. So much had changed. There were new colors along the walls and ceilings everywhere in the Citadel, making it appear like a beautiful tapestry wherever the eye could see, and there were so many new people by the dozens, though Weapon couldn't see them due to all the boring secrecy. Most importantly, the new Master Surnir was very smart, and so much more fun to poke and prod with insults. However, his feelings and fears zipped all around like a family of flies, and Weapon found him to be a little scary if they buzzed for a little too long. Our master is a concerning one. We would do best to follow his orders, and not take too long to do it. His threat against us was rather serious. Clarence was keeping his bouncy voice from being any louder than a breath, and Weapon's eyes flashed back and forth. If anyone saw him, except for the Cullen, that would be disastrous. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be many humans at all on the stony road at the moment, but even after confirming that the path was clear, Weapon just kept on watching the little pathway through the town, taking in the wondrous beauty of it all. The houses were all bunched up against one another, and many of them looked as if they were trying to pretend to be the big fortress of Master Surnir, with white paint plastered on a pointlessly pointy roof. It was silly of them to even try, since their houses were made of wood and stone, and not out of carcasses. The people were all different too, as every human Weapon had ever seen grew hair that was black, white, or some mixture of them both. But the guy smacking metal sticks into that wordy tapestry, and that smaller one picking his nose while watching him, had hair the color of sunlight. Was their hair like that because the sun was gone? On Weapon's first mission, the sun was big and bright and far away, but now it was completely missing, leaving behind many thousands of tiny, colorful lights on a void stretching across the whole sky. It almost reminded him of the nothingness, though a cold silver light shone from a big, pretty rock above the Citadel. Somehow, Weapon knew the sun would return, so maybe the yellow-haired people would become silver-haired when that happened. Just as he thought that, a new person appeared from a house, but his hair was already silver. No, actually, it was more so a grain white like all the other old people, but this was definitely not someone who lived in the Citadel, not with those scaleless and lumpy clothes. The old one handed a glass of some liquid to the person hitting the tapestry, and they talked with each other about how cold it was, and that the big feast was so soon, and how tasty your cordial is, Miss Galila. And then all three of the humans walked inside a house glowing with flickering flames. None of them had a boar pig, so they weren't who Weapon was looking for. I waited too long. That was over 5 minutes, Clarence reprimanded. I don't need to watch anyone for any more than a couple seconds, or else I'll be here all night. Weapon agreed. While the people had been fascinating to observe, there was nothing really gained from listening to their blabber. However, as Weapon crawled up the side of a house, stretching and shifting to avoid any of the windows, he realized there had been a single thing that was odd about that conversation. The words they used, and the tones they highlighted with their voice to communicate, were distinctly not like the ones used by Master Surnir and pretty much everyone else in the Citadel. How strange. Weapon had understood the differences so perfectly that he'd barely noticed that they were different at all. That's me, master of all languages. Clarence chuckled as they reached the top of the house, nearly as high in the air as the rafters of the dining hall had been, and Weapon found himself stunned by a truly awesome surprise. The world was so big! The whole village was laid out before him, all the pointy roofs slowly softening and rounding and spreading out until they were far outside of his ability to observe them, but he could still see them. Only the sun, the lights of the night, and the circular rock were in that category before, but now even just the places he could walk to were so far away. They must have been nearly 1,000 feet from him. Better yet, As the houses spread away, orange and red trees began to pop up between them, and pale wisps of grass between layers and layers of dead leaves on the ground. Even further, those trees started to bunch together like the pointy buildings, rising onto hills and lumps of earth nearly the size of the citadel. But somehow it got even better. Far beyond them, there were absolutely enormous hills, what must have been tens of thousands of feet away, and these were covered in some sort of white blanket. The trees swayed with rustles in the nighttime breeze, which blotted out any and all distractions from the village, and the whole of Weapon's vision became a feast almost better than the food had been. There was an end to the food, but this was something that Weapon could devour forever. And so there I stood on the roof for 20 whole minutes. Clarence chuckled. I admit the Carfelian Valley is really one of the more splendid places on the continent, but even that can't stop me from completing my mission. He sighed as Weapon continued smiling at the majestic world. See, this is why I don't like expeditions. Unless it is something that truly can't be ignored, let's avoid any further distractions. Weapon reluctantly agreed, and began leaping from building to building, all the while moving northwest, towards the dip in the mountains where the enemies of Master Cernier crept. 3 moments later, something appeared that truly couldn't be ignored. A waft of steamy scents floated up from a balcony on the second floor of a large building, all originating from a marvelous little thing. Weapon quickly observed it to be sure, and he began to jump for joy. Somehow, people had taken the sweetness of fruits, the softness of bread, and the heartiness of eggs, and smashed them together into a plump circlet of pure delight. However, the order from Master Cernier was still so clear in Weapon's mind. No food until the mission is over. Nevertheless, he stayed perched upon the roof, staring at the wondrous circlet, wondering if there was something that could be done to obey Master Cernier, yet also indulge in this absolute marvel of reality, one which surpassed even the view in some strange ways. My, there were so many ways in which things could be good. What am I doing? Clarence hissed. Is this how the most magnificent being acts, without even a modicum of restraint? How rude. Of course Weapon had restraint. That's why he didn't just devour this thing on sight. He could stare at and observe something he desired, yet refrain from eating it. No matter how much his mouth swirled in anticipation, no matter how good those fruits would taste while warm and nestled between buttery bread. Weapon felt as if his eyes were about to pop out of his head, but he kept them on the food for another minute. Then he smiled. It was done. An idea had flashed through Weapon's mind. Oh, let's not be foolish, Clarence whispered, and Weapon agreed. This wasn't the thought of a fool, but of a genius. His arms shifted into long tendrils, and they wrapped around the circlet, snatching it off the plate. Quickly, he formed a small hook on the ridges of his back, and he hung the sweet-smelling meal from it with a wide smile. Perhaps he couldn't eat it now, but he would carry it with him until the mission was accomplished. Even if that would take several days, the wait would be worth it. What a silly gesture. By the time we're done, that won't be tasty at all anymore. It would get very cold, yes, but even cold food was good. It would be increasingly difficult to leap from house to house now, but Weapon could still manage for a little while longer. By the time Weapon would need to skulk along the shadows of the ground, there would be almost no one left to see him, though Weapon was pretty sure that even if there were 100 people all on the hunt, he could still sneak by without any trouble. As the citadel appeared to grow smaller and smaller behind him, Weapon realized that he felt like he hadn't moved at all, yet he had gone farther than ever before. Though it was disconcerting to feel such opposite realities at once, the tiny part of Weapon that now lay in the very steel tower of the fortress didn't have much to sense, and so it could be ignored fairly easily. What was particularly odd about it was that Weapon had moved so far away that he could no longer observe himself directly. He was truly separated from himself, but one mind remained. That was good. Weapon had been a little worried that he might have been left in that tiny lightless jar while Clarence got to do all of the exciting missions. Instead, Clarence and Weapon were both in the jar, and both leaping on top of a patchy wooden roof near a big field of overturned dirt. It was such a strange feeling, but it didn't cause any pain. If so, why did he dislike it so much? Was it because Weapon's true form wasn't split off at all? Find the hidden secrets of your mind that shall set you free. The tingly and annoying order which kept repeating with some voice Weapon couldn't quite place had been somewhat silent amid all the meetings and happenings, but it started to grow louder again. It distracted him for just a few moments, and before he'd realized it, the circlet had snapped, and it was falling down off the roof and into a puddle of muddy water near a window. Weapon tried to save it, but he knew it was too late the moment he leapt to the ground after it. All he could do was stare as the bread broke apart, and all the sweetness of the fruits mixed in with the liquidy dust and grime. I thought this might happen. Oh well, on I go to Traveler's Pass. Clarence simply grinned, but Weapon couldn't help but feel disappointed and sad. Now no one would have the circlet. Not Weapon, not the person who made it. Why, even its very purpose was going to be unfulfilled. It was a delicious piece of food that would never be eaten. That would be like if Weapon just slept in the nothingness forever, never getting to go on a mission. That was the fate Weapon had forced upon this poor, tasty circlet. How deeply tragic. Weapon was just about to keep moving onwards when a gruff voice from inside the house said something very, very important, and Weapon froze in excitement.
I don't like it, Mick. There's something about all this secret talk happening right before the feast that doesn't sit right. That kid's privy to something big, yeah, but I don't think it's good. He said that it'll help all of us, but I'm thinking he's trying to convince himself of that. Something that big will make itself clear soon enough, no matter what Cullen's secret mission is.
They were talking about Cullen. They even used the same sounds and everything for his name. Weapon quickly moved directly under the window and listened as carefully as possible. A lighter voice responded to the gruff one. I just hope he gets back here soon so he can tell us how much he liked our special feast at his cave house. It was so hard to just sit there and not take a single bite that whole time. Yes, this human understood the pain. The orders he had to follow were just as cruel. The gruff voice laughed.
Don't think I didn't feel the same. At least we didn't have to make it. A simple hour's trek through the hills is nothing compared to the 4 hours your mother spent on it. Besides, we'll have plenty of everything 2 days from now, so long as nothing happens. Do you know if they'll have the wagons ready by then?
Yep, those tokens sound amazing. Weapon didn't really care for whatever they were talking about now, but the most important information that could have possibly been spoken was now in Weapon's possession. Cullen was in a cave towards the lands west of the village. It was very close, too. Weapon could probably reach it within just a few minutes. As he shifted into a many-legged form that skittered across the empty field faster than any beast, Weapon realized that even if it hadn't been to eat, the circlet had served a purpose. Without it falling to the ground, Weapon would never have heard of Cullen's home, and this whole mission would be thrown into jeopardy. If even a circlet of food had so many different reasons for being, then perhaps Weapon did too. He thought back to the small image he'd drawn on the rafters that had brought joy for hours, an action so quiet and distant from the exciting mission that had followed, yet it had been so much more wonderful in so many ways. How smart Weapon was for taking that circlet. Clarence whispered in response to that as they climbed up one of the hills. Luck is all this was. I mustn't make the mistake of attributing fortunate happenstance to the wondrous skills I possess. Weapon reached the top of the hill, which revealed a host of forested dales and the great sloping base of the mountains beyond them. They were also so wonderful to see, even as his confidence began to wither. Besides, even if I didn't find him before, we'd meet on the mountain since we're going the same way. What an unusual and ultimately pointless discovery. It'll be best for me to avoid any and all fleeting fancies, and listen to my intelligence when making any further decisions. Clarence was probably right, and the Weapon felt rather annoyed at that. He agreed. At least he could find some respite in the fact that there were times when Weapon's decisions would be the best choices anyway, even if he couldn't know when those would be. As Weapon traveled further and further into the forest, he was able to observe a wealth of little creatures hidden in and around the ground and the trees, many of which were almost dead. No, that wasn't quite right. They were simply in some sort of deep sleep. Not quite as deep as the nothingness, but Weapon found an odd sense of kinship with them. Though there wasn't much to learn from these animals while they were in such a state, the few that remained awake dashed about among and under the leaves on the ground, searching and stashing away little seeds and plants, and sometimes eating them. Why were they eating something that was closer to a rock than to food? Were they so different that those items were food to them? This brought up an interesting question in Weapon's mind. Did Master Cernier simply mean that no human food was to be eaten? He snuck up on a tiny bush-tailed little gnawer with one of the seeds in its hand, and grabbed it tightly with long-fingered claws. It let out a single, high-pitched squeal, and fell limply in Weapon's grip. He blinked in shock. How easily it had broken. It was not dead, but several of the bones in its side had splintered and shattered. Weapon felt sorry about that, and felt even sorrier when he tasted the seed and found it to be disgusting. Even if he could eat it, it would be a miserable experience. A crushingly uncomfortable feeling pulsed inside of Weapon, and a desire to serve this little poor creature in some way, to fix what he had done pushed through him. I should leave it. If I wait around for too much longer, Cullen might have already left his home. Clarence was right. Cullen might be missed, but the Traveler's Pass was still so far away. If Weapon could figure out how to fix this creature, or at least keep it safe, he could then catch up to Cullen with his far greater speed. Just look at that wound. There's no survival for this squirrel. Observation will simply confirm this. So Weapon observed. He looked closely at every tiny part of the creature's body, every connective tissue, every nerve ending. Bodies and what they needed to live were one of the only things Weapon knew all about in detail, and especially what was needed to end them. Though this tiny body was very different from humans and large beasts, there were many similarities, and slowly, surely, Weapon began to understand it. The tips of his fingers began to shift into a very slight substance, one closer to the gaseous form than that of any tool, and he inserted it past the stained fur and into the wound, beginning to shift and move the pieces of bone amidst the torn and tattered flesh. What a waste of time, Clarence muttered, but Weapon was too focused to think about that. If his movements were too extreme, they would only make the wound worse, killing the creature, and Weapon couldn't bear the thought of that. The scent of blood was thick in the air, and Weapon could tell that hungry beasts who ate the uninflamed flesh of others were beginning to approach. Weapon couldn't focus on both, so he shifted his form into a small, impenetrable sphere around the squirrel, shielding it with his body while several tendrils inside continued their slow process. Soon, Weapon realized that even if every fragment of bone was in the right place, and every tassel of flesh had been pressed back together, it would all fall apart the second they were released. It was knitting itself together, but so slowly that it was barely noticeable even with the furthest extent of observation. It would take many days, if not weeks, and by then there would be too much blood lost. "And the valley will be overtaken," Clarence hissed. What could he do? What was possible? Was it impossible? A new wordless voice began to whisper again in Weapon, a fear that was similar but so different to the biting flurry of a losing battle. The vaporous form wavered, then solidified alongside Weapon's resolve. If he had to hold this creature together, then that is what he would do. Many thousands of Weapon's tiny tendrils wrapped around the shattered bones of the squirrel, sealing them together. Once every single one was connected, Weapon released the tendrils entirely from himself. Immediately, they began to fade away, and Weapon poured more and more of his being into them. Weapon's very essence swirled within the creature's blood, and to his surprise, it began to fuse the wounds together on its own. He could no longer control the tendrils or the given essence. They now acted as part of the squirrel itself. Weapon needed to do little more than observe now as the small body of the squirrel twitched, then began to move. All sense of pain now vanished as the creature stood within Weapon's sphere, shaking and fearful. Where the bones had been broken, a dark streak now marked the russet coat of fur, and wisps of smoky shadows seemed to flit off of it. A desperate satisfaction flooded Weapon, and he opened himself, reforming into his hooded form with the squirrel on his hand. It bolted, leaping with an impressive strength to a nearby tree, and it chattered angrily before disappearing from sight. As Weapon observed it dash off through the forest, the wispy tendrils of dark smoke fading after it, he felt as if his clumsy actions had been redeemed. Though a concerning thought rose up in the wake of his relief, as the memory of the many vicious and grievous wounds he'd inflicted upon those in the dining hall clashed against this strange experience in the forest. How could he have felt so little when tearing apart so many others, those who had fear not just for themselves, but for those around them, and for concepts so deep that even Weapon couldn't understand them yet? Shouldn't that inspire far more of that wretched feeling? And yet, Clarence had enjoyed it immensely, and Weapon too found it exciting at the very least. "It's quite simple. Those who have been chosen to die by my master are no longer worthy of living. Their very existence no longer has meaning in this world, and I do our reality a favor by removing them from it. Let this be the last creature we hurt without reason, and the last creature we feel any sorrow over killing. It is a challenge to place your life against another's, and to overcome that challenge is a thrill unlike any other. I must indulge in that thrill more often." Weapon smiled. Clarence made so much sense. Yes, he should be careful and cautious around the friends and acquaintances of Master Cernier and all the things beyond, while learning from all those he was to slay. Though he had just learned from that squirrel too, so perhaps there was more to uncover than just that. For now, Weapon glanced up at the newly rising sun, simply observing its effect to avoid the blinding power, and enjoying the heat. Though rather straightforward, it was certainly much more of a comfort than the vast night. "However, it seems that my abilities are far more extensive and mysterious than even I realized." Clarence hesitated, quite a bit longer than Weapon had ever heard. Then he spoke quickly as he continued. I must never give myself up like that again. It is grossly inefficient. A few simple inches of flesh were restored, yet a full pint of this form has up and vanished. Clarence clicked his tongue, reprimanding Weapon fiercely as he realized the Pouncy voice was right. Though it was slight, Weapon was now noticeably smaller, and by more than he'd thought. How will I serve Master Cernier if I end up being even smaller than he is? And on top of that, look at the time that's been wasted. I was here for 3 hours, and now the boy is probably long gone. I can assuredly find him, but such a delay cannot be tolerated any further. Imagine if Clarence was cut off as the entire world was flooded with a soft light, and yet the forest and the sun remained completely unchanged. Weapon was very confused for a moment as there, staring at Weapon in a dark and excessively furnished and soft redwood room, stood a giant Master Cernier, dressed in poofy green clothes. He spoke in a dulled tone, his voice slightly quivering. "Can you hear me, Jin?" "Well, this is disconcerting," Clarence chuckled, both in the bright forest and in the dark room. "Being in 2 places at once is new to me, though your failure to wish me a good morning remains consistent." He sighed, and Weapon smiled to understand that this was the part of him that was still in the citadel. His observation there was so small that it could only reach the edges of the jar and the cloth that covered it, almost making it feel like the nothing. But now the cloth was removed, and the inner sanctum of the Cernier could be seen. It was then that all the confusion returned once more, as right behind Master Cernier was... Master Cernier! The first one! What should he do? If there were 2 of them, which one was more important? Did Clarence know? The bouncy voice simply grinned. "That image of your father is rather lifelike in both the artistry and size, though it seems to have toned down the girth of the real thing. Did he take my advice before he shuffled off to his grave?" Oh, right. The old Master Cernier wasn't really moving. If it was just a recreation like the tapestries and windows, it was certainly close enough to the real thing. "He certainly didn't keep his paperwork sorted like I'd hoped. Either way, I'm happy to see your grumpiness has diminished, so what can I do for you?" The second Master Cernier looked both relieved and incredibly annoyed. "You seem to have forgotten my absolute hold over you. Have you managed to find Cullen?" Clarence's answer was more genteel than Weapon had ever heard before. "Well, Master Cernier, not quite yet, but I can assure you that he is well, as there's been no time for him to have made it all the way up the pass yet. Don't you worry. I'll catch up with him soon, and all of your desires will be fulfilled to the best of my immense ability. So if you have nothing more to inform us of, I shall be on my way." "Understood. I will be sure to talk to you at least once each day, and I expect there to be some progress made." As the veil of darkness began to close again, there was one thing Weapon desperately wanted to ask about. He had no idea when Master Cernier would see them again, for 1 day was such a long time to wait, especially with such an important matter. Clarence sighed and spoke quickly. "It may be true that we will almost certainly have caught up by then, but I will feel far more capable if it might be permitted for me to eat even just 1 tiny morsel. Though it is certainly not necessary, and indigestion might even cause a delay, but—" Master Cernier squinted. "I suppose 1 small thing each day should be acceptable, but if any strange side effects occur, you are to stop immediately." Elation flooded through Weapon. He had hoped for the chance of just 1 thing, even just the tree seed for the mission, but this was so wonderfully generous. He would have to think carefully about what he would eat. "Why, thank you, Master Cernier. Your compassion is utterly sublime." How could Clarence sound so dour? This was the most wonderful day of Weapon's life. As the darkness finally closed around Weapon in the citadel, he leapt to his feet, and the leaves underneath crunched ferociously. Well, how lucky indeed. Though I imagine Master Cernier will be disappointed if Cullen is not found quickly. Why, he might even revoke the beloved eating privilege. Weapon nodded in concern. He quickly shifted his form into that of the squirrel, and though it was far larger than any of the squirrels he'd ever observed, it only bolstered his speed as he tore westward through the forest. Trees flew past, and animals fled at the noise as he launched from one branch to another, moving faster and faster until the image of a well-traveled cave filled the edge of his observation. In fact, there were many caves near here, but only one with a large wooden structure within. Weapon reached the entrance and stopped, observing the small clearing within. Yes, there was certainly a house here, but it had just a single old human and no pig to be found. Unfortunately, Cullen had already disappeared. Weapon was worried. All that was left to do was to reach Traveler's Pass first, and there was no telling how long it would take Cullen to arrive. Unless... Weapon had a new idea. While in the form of a squirrel, he had noticed that there had been a tinge to his observation, one that hadn't appeared in any of the other shapes. It was similar to the rest of his observation, but both remarkably less precise and immensely farther reaching. Most importantly, it made his pointy nose twitch. Was it because of his incredibly in-depth observation of the squirrel that he was able to truly replicate their senses? For every other creature, Weapon had simply taken their outward forms, but this was something entirely new. Why, he could all but see a northward trail where a human and a pig had walked less than a few hours ago. "The world's best tracker knows no limits!" Clarence laughed, and Weapon laughed with him. It was good to agree with the bouncy voice again, as it felt like they'd had lots of disagreements ever since this mission had begun. How sad it was to disagree with yourself. It was downright confusing to do so, and it made it hard for any quick decisions. This unity would be exactly what they needed to complete this mission perfectly. The trail was tougher to follow than Weapon had thought, and he often had to double back once or twice if he went too far forward. The path the two had taken wasn't quite as simple as most human trails had led Weapon to believe. Sometimes they would cross over a river, blotting out the scent for a while. Other times they would go straight up a wall. How did they do that without any claws? Maybe this pig had claw feet, or Carphalians could secretly fly. It was tricky for Weapon to follow, even as a squirrel, and he had to shift his form once or twice to make it up some of the steeper inclines. Nevertheless, progress was being made, and the scent was growing stronger. Weapon was very, very close when the clouds above gathered, darkening the sky, and the mountain ahead dramatically changed. Now, instead of just leaves on the ground, there was a coating of soft white powdery rain that stuck to everything, and it just kept on getting thicker and prettier. Everywhere he looked, the land itself sparkled and shone with iridescent lights, though each turned out to be simple reflections and not precious stones. Weapon could tell it was also much colder than anything he'd seen before, but it didn't really bother him at all. In fact, it seemed to bundle all his energy together, and alongside the beautiful sight, it was surprisingly refreshing. It would need to be a lot chillier than this if it was going to stop him. However, even as it covered everything, Weapon started to miss the warmth of the sun. "Well, this should make my job easy." Clarence grinned and circled the imprints in the sky powder made by two familiar-smelling figures. Yes, now Weapon no longer needed to even be in the squirrely form to find them. They were so very close, and Weapon was incredibly excited to see his soon-to-be guide. Clarence scoffed, making a chattery sound in Weapon's throat. "Guides are overrated. I don't care much for expeditions, but I've clearly done quite well so far, so we have no need for a blabbering fool of a human to tell us what to do." "Aside from Master Cernier, right?" "Yes, aside from Master Cernier, no one can command us." Clarence must be in a silly mood. How else could he forget that? Weapon silently chuckled as they began to quickly follow the trail, shifting into a form that would be sure to catch this Cullen off guard. Weapon couldn't wait to see the look on his face. Most of the trees had already lost half of their leaves in this area, and many animals had either left or gone into hibernation. The bashful spirit of the mountains was growing bold. He would be courting the valley lakes once more within the month. Cullen pulled his fur garment closer. "It'll only be colder from here on out, Snuff. You ready for this?" Snuffler tugged a bit on her colorful cloak that old Galila had knitted for her. Though the snugness remained, it had certainly been crafted with care. She grunted and began trotting ahead of Cullen. Nearly every tree on the heights of Traveler's Pass was completely bare now, and snow blanketed the ground. Cullen rarely ventured this far up the mountains when winter was so close, and almost never to Traveler's Pass itself or beyond. There wasn't any recorded stone gut here, and any other plants were considerably rare in the highest heights of the Carfell Mountains, and as such were usually a waste of valuable time to explore. Just going through the lower areas of the pass was enough for slightly longer expeditions. That being said, there was something uniquely exhilarating about standing upon the highest point of the world in the coldest months, seeing the majesty of the land spread out before you in a still, sparkling veil of snow. And yet, the world far beyond the mountains remained unchanged. It had often been obscured by clouds, but the brief flashes of the immense reddish-brown land, barren of hills or trees, remained without the pale snows even in the depths of winter. Was that land simply too low and close to the heart of the earth for the snow to reach it over the few months it had power? Well, he would be exploring that unknown land within the week, and that question, along with many more, would be answered. The thought was more than a little exciting. However, he would first need to get past those outsiders trying to cut their way up the mountains. Avoiding them entirely and scaling down one of the sheer drops on each side of the slope would be all but impossible, even for him.
Though Cullen had successfully descended sheer drops before, none had been any higher than the citadel. Besides that, while Snuffler could stand upon incredibly precarious inclines, completely vertical walls were still a bit too much for her. Diplomacy would have to be the way to go, but communication without any knowledge of the outsider's language would be tricky. There was still plenty of time to prepare a strategy, so no need to worry at the moment. For now, let's just reach the pass. Sound good? Cullen glanced over at Snuffler, but she had stopped. The mountain boar began to grunt in low, quick bursts. Someone, or something, was nearby. Cullen spun around, scanning the white ground and snow-covered rocks for anything out of the ordinary. The dark, leafless spikes of nearby tree trunks were too thin to cover a human, and there was only a dusting of snow on the ground that could barely hide the grass beneath it, but he still couldn't see any movement. However, Snuffler had never been wrong before. Cullen gripped his pick, holding it up like a weapon. Snuffler was facing towards a small, lone tree about 20 feet away. It was incredibly scrawny, even more so than the other trees with the branches being barely a few inches wide. Even a rat would be hard-pressed to hide behind it. As Cullen's mind raced with possibilities, an absurd answer came to him. If it wasn't a human, could it be a spirit of some sort? No, that was foolish thinking, but nothing else could be there, unless Snuffler's nose was mistaken. Cullen glanced down at her again. She was still focused. Whoever she smelled was certainly there, and whoever it was, it absolutely couldn't be human. Though it seemed ridiculous, Cullen decided he may as well address whatever this was as a spirit. An animal wouldn't understand his words, just the intention, so on the slightest of chances that this was something from one of the old legends, he may as well try it. He cleared his throat, and with a smile he shouted, "Good morning to you, my stealthy observer. I hope you are feeling well?" Cullen's voice echoed with intensity throughout the mountaintop, and as it died away, the silence became deafening. He waited a moment, and seeing nothing move, spoke again. "You're a spirit of some sort, huh?" Cullen kept any fear he felt out of his voice and stance. Self-control was essential in any confrontation, and doubly so for unknown threats. "I'm not here to harm or trespass, so let me through and I'll be out of this place soon enough." Another few seconds passed, and Snuffler remained still, staring at the tree with her ears folded back. Slowly, as if in response to those words, one of the branches on the tree began to shift, almost as if a wind was blowing it and nothing else. "Get ready, Snuff," Cullen whispered, allowing a slight tension in his legs in case a quick escape was necessary. As the branch began to bend downward, its movement seemed to spread throughout the whole of the tree. Then the entire thing reached the ground, not like a felled trunk from a woodsman's axe, but melting down like a lump of wax exposed to flame. Cullen stared at the mysterious living substance, his mind racing. The legends of spirits his father had told him. Some must have been true after all, though their capacity for stealth was utterly remarkable. How many of these things had watched Cullen over the past 10 years? If he thought they existed, it was in a nebulous, fantastical way. Cullen never imagined something so viscerally unnatural actually forming as it was before him right now. It coalesced into a pile of ash-gray matter, and before Cullen could question it, an enormous grinning mouth formed on the center of the blob, filled with large and sharp but human-like teeth. Then the mouth spoke. "So, you have an idea about what I am, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts, but is someone who follows a pig's lead really a guy I should take seriously?" It burst into high-pitched laughter, stunning Cullen even more than hearing a spirit mock him had already done. How he responded would be the difference between life, or pain and probably death. Cullen relaxed his position, giving a practiced smirk of nonchalance. "Hey, I'll take that as a compliment. She's pretty smart, you know." Cullen's manufactured confidence calmed Snuffler a bit, and she trotted back a couple of feet. He could bluff humans, and even animals. Could he fool a spirit? Let's hope this works. "How rude of me. I haven't introduced myself." He bowed in a very similar way to his show of fealty to Lord Sernir and said, "I am the dashing forager of the Carfelian Valley, whom you may refer to as Cully, and this is my workmate and pet Snuffy." If this was the sort of spirit who could gain power from names, these pseudonyms would provide a small level of defense. The spirit began to grow upwards until it was a pillar of grayish matter. The mouth remained near the top, making it seem like it had a head of some sort. This head tilted to the side, and the spirit spoke again. "My, your languages have so many unnecessary intricacies. I was under the impression you were called Cullen, but it seems Cully will have to do for now." Two blazing green eyes burst from underneath the sliding outer layer near the mouth, fixing themselves directly on a terrified Cullen.
Unless you were lying to me,
Boils and crud, it already knew his name. He had to salvage this somehow, any way he could. He only stammered a bit as he said, Well, not quite. Cully is the name I give to spirits who I'm friends with, and so it is perfectly acceptable and no lie, I assure you. Could it read his mind? If so, he was doomed anyway. Snuffler prepared to charge the creature, and Cullen braced himself. It was now moving closer, growing spindly legs that extended out in every direction and skittering forwards in the snow. However, there was something about the eyes that kept him from running or fighting back. They were intense and brimming with an inhuman energy, but they held no malice whatsoever. It stopped mere inches from his face with a jolt, staring closely at him as if searching through his entire life and into the most hidden depths of his soul. Cullen could scarcely breathe, and even Snuffler was too awestruck to move. After the briefest moment that felt like a lifetime, the spirit spoke again.
Despite such primal fear and piteous plight, you would claim me as your friend?
Its mouth twisted upwards into an impossibly large grin as it loomed over Cullen.
Do you truly mean such a ridiculous thing?
In an act of pure instinct, Cullen held onto his bluff. What, do you think I lied? Of course you're my friend, Spirit. That is, if you feel the same way. It pulled back, contorting and twisting upon itself until it took the form of an average-sized human wrapped in a cloak. The eyes and mouth still danced a bit too far outside the hems of the clothes, but Cullen sighed in relief upon seeing the less monstrous sight. It bowed towards Cullen, perfectly mirroring his greeting. As it did, it spoke once more.
Then, Cullion, I wholeheartedly accept. A friend! Weapon had a friend! For so long, almost 2 whole days now, Weapon had dreamed of this moment. This was a chance to find someone, anyone who Weapon and Clarence could talk to without worrying about killing him or taking any orders from him. It almost made the lovely invigoration of the touch and sparkle of the sky powder fade away into nothing compared to the sheer ecstaticity of this new treasure. Sure, the friend talked to a pig, but that was fine with Weapon. That pig was really cool, with giant rounded knives poking out of its mouth, and wearing colorful clothing and packs of strange materials just like a human, so Weapon saw no problem with following the lead of a creature with such powerful killing tools and fashionable sensibilities. Maybe if Weapon took the form of the pig, Snuffy, Cully had called it, then Cully would be happy to follow Weapon. Oh, that would be wonderful. But before Weapon could do so, Clarence continued talking to Cully, though he used that whisper for when he was talking to Weapon at the same time. Now that that's over and accepted, I should tell you that I have a mind to follow you wherever you are going, and not have you follow me. Is that clear?
Yes, Weapon thought, and Cully said at the same time.
How amazing! They were already so in sync!
Although, Spirit, it might be pretty dangerous where I'm going. Are you sure you can be quiet while we're there? I really don't want the outsiders to see either of us without some sort of plan, as they can be rather jumpy.
Cully must have been referring to the Markelts and Rotrars, and Weapon suddenly realized that his new friend wasn't working for them. That made him feel very happy indeed. Just thinking of the possibility that he might have had to kill his new friend was horrible. That being said, Cully was underestimating just how capable Weapon was. Of course I can! Why does everyone ask me if I can be stealthy literal seconds after I've shown off how masterful I am at that very thing? Really, it's downright embarrassing. Weapon shook his head and made a clicking sound of mocking disappointment. Rest assured, Piggy Man, they will never know even when I'm right at their throats, and if they do, they won't for long. Cully squinted, and though Weapon observed that his fear had lessened, he was still clearly hiding his true feelings towards the spirit. That's right, Cully had called him a spirit. But before Weapon became excited, he realized that he had been called so many things that not all of them could have been correct. Djinn, Northmount monster, Weapon, spirit. Although maybe spirit was just a Carfelian way of saying djinn. Weapon would have to ask about that at some point.
I was wondering, Spirit. You know my name already, though I won't ask where you got it, so do you mind at all telling me yours? Now that we're friends and all that?
Aha, Weapon knew how to handle this question now. Cully wouldn't throw him off kilter like Lord Cernier had done. Even so, Weapon still wondered when he would find the answer that would feel truly satisfactory. If you are so desperate to know, then I suppose you may refer to me as Clarence. There. Clarence had been oddly unenthusiastic about telling Cully that, but now they could talk to each other by names and share secrets, just like friends do. Cully grinned.
In that case, Clarence, it's good to meet you. And now that we know each other, why exactly are you revealing yourself and following me? I've been up in these mountains for years, and I don't think I've ever seen anyone like you.
Well, I suppose we haven't met because I'm only a few days old, give or take 50 years. I simply haven't had the chance to witness such blind optimism, and so to see it through to the end is my earnest desire. It also wasn't hard to find you in this snow, as you've done such a terrible job keeping your tracks hidden.
Sure.
Cully looked shocked and saddened at that. No, not quite sad. Indignant was a little more accurate. Either way, he didn't seem to like that answer. Was Clarence not very good at talking to Cully? But why could that be? Weapon decided to think about it for a bit before trying again. I'll leave you to wonder at my presence in peace for now, but know that I'll be nearby, keeping an eye or two. Weapon manifested 3 more eyes on his forehead, and 1 on a long finger pointed at Cully. Or many more than that on you, little forager. Clarence laughed to end off that imposing goodbye, and Weapon shifted his form into a flattened flowing substance that seeped below the white powder, the snow as Clarence had called it. It was quite comfortable to the touch, and it didn't melt on Weapon's form as it did on the face and breath of the 2 they were following. Cully mentioned something to his pig, and they continued walking towards the pass, Weapon following closely behind. A bright smile seared across his mind. How delightful this all was, and on top of that, dinner was secured. By the time Weapon observed Cully and Snuffy reaching the final plateau before the mountain's crest, he noticed that all of the humans' immediate fear had almost completely dissipated. If so, then he must have decided to trust Weapon now. And yet, there was still that irregular thump to his heart, and the slight hesitation in his stride that betrayed a secret fear smoldering within of something else. It was very different from any other type of fear that Weapon had ever observed in another. The skinny Master Cernier had a wealth of fear that he'd been hiding from those around him, but Cully had a deep fear that was hidden from himself. It was very strange. Why would you hide fear from your own mind? Weapon thought that fear was the voice that kept you safe. It prevented you from doing anything that would tear you apart into the nothingness that crept at the edge of everything. Even if Cully couldn't masterfully separate himself from reality, surely that fear would still protect him from other things. Unfortunately, Weapon couldn't even ask him, because Cully didn't even know it was there. Remember, I don't have any friends, even if this Cullen wants to be one. He is simply our task to protect. Clarence whispered while beneath the snow, and Weapon was surprised. He was so sure that they would be getting along wonderfully, but it truly seemed that Clarence really didn't like Cully. Oh well, it just meant that Weapon would have to work hard and make Clarence and Cully the best of friends. After all, Weapon already was, so it couldn't take too long. Even as Clarence sighed in annoyance, Weapon was very excited. The mountaintop was in sight, and with it, the whole of this wonderful reality.